Chapter 9. Deep Water. It was at harvest time each year that the half-season ended, and all the men came home to Black Ness. Finlayson got a hero's welcome then, of course, and he rose even higher in Peter and Janet's favor when he offered to stay on to help with the harvest on their croft. Even when this work was over, however, he still lingered, and the reason for this was soon plain. It was Elspeth who had been the attraction for him all along, it seemed, for now he was beginning to court her with all the charm at his command. There were various opinions about the situation, of course. Nickel was furious about it, but Elspeth was delighted to have no less than 2 handsome young men courting her. The rest of the folk in Black Ness saw no harm in it at all. How could they? Indeed, when they were all still of the opinion that any strangeness about Finlayson was due to his being a foreigner. Only Robbie thought differently, and he was utterly dismayed by the idea that Elspeth might even consider marrying Finlayson. But supposing she did, he argued to himself, that would make nonsense of the words. You will be rich when you wed. For how could Elspeth be rich if she married Finlayson, any more than she would be if she married Nickel? The weeks after harvest time slid by, with Robbie still uneasily pondering this. And meanwhile, Peter and Janet agreed that they were still glad to see Finlayson staying on with them. And he was a great help on the croft, after all, and he was company for Peter now that old Da was dead, and Nickel had turned so awkward over his courtship business. Moreover, as they were both fond of saying, the favors were far from being all on their side, considering what they owed him, however, in the matter of the press gang. Indeed, it seemed to Robbie things had now got to the stage where Finlayson could do no wrong in his parents' eyes. And since the same Robbie had a great respect for his parents, he began at last to wonder if his own thoughts about Finlayson might perhaps be a bit on the foolish side. After all, as he had to admit to himself, he had no really good grounds for these thoughts, just his own imagination. In fact, and the last rambling words of a sick old man. Besides which, he was finding Finlayson a much more talkative man now that old Da was dead, and quite willing to speak in a friendly way of the roving life he had led. Once, on the shores of Greenland, he told Robbie, a man came at me with a knife to kill me. See, I bear the mark of his knife to this very day, in this long white scar that is healed over on my shoulder. Then on he went, spinning many another tale of strange adventures in far countries, and never once did Robbie dream that all this friendliness might be just a device for drawing him into the same snare of charm he had already begun to hold Elspeth. There was something else, too, which lulled Robbie's fears at that time and drove other forms of imagining from his mind, for it was in the slack season after harvest each year that he went to school. And that particular year, he had begun to study navigation. Now this was a subject which could take a Shetland boy far, perhaps even as far as commanding his own whaling ship, and Robbie thought it would be a grand thing to sail north and ever northward in pursuit of the great whale. So it happened that he began to think ever less about Finlayson, and it was with great dreams of whaling ships in his head that he set off each day for the schoolhouse on the far side of the hill to study with the rest of the boys in Black Ness. This left him with only weekends for the other great interest he always occupied him at that time of year, and which was therefore another thing that took his mind off Finlayson, for it was then, from about the middle of September to the end of October, that all the Selkie pups were born. Robbie knew every place these were to be found, of course. From all the previous years he had gone with old Da to visit them. And so, every Saturday, he could persuade his father to let him have the boat. He was always away by himself to the cliffs rising steeply from the west side of the Vaud. This was where the sea had made deep cuts into the rock face, the kind of cut with a name that had a sound yo, although it was spelled Geo. This was where the great dark gray bull seals came ashore to fight for mastery of the shingle beach at the inner end of the yo. This was where the sleek and shiny cow seals came ashore also to have their pups. And this was where Robbie hoped one day to realize his great longing to pick up one of these pups so he could learn what a seal felt like. Not that he would take any risks in that, he assured himself when he remembered old Daw's warning and felt his conscience pricking him. To begin with, he would choose a small yo where there was only likely to be a small nursery of pups with a few cow seals and probably only one bull seal. Also, he would not go ashore at all if the bull was there to guard the beach, and he would take care to hold the pups so that it could not possibly bite him. With all this in mind, then, Robbie fixed that year on a yo that exactly suited this purpose, and patiently every Saturday he visited it, until at last there came the moment he had planned. 8 white seal pups lay on the tiny beach at the inner end of the yo. There was no sign of the bull seal, which usually lay roaring there. No sign even of a single cow seal flopping about on the beach, or sliding gracefully through the water. With his heart hammering out a great drum beat on his ribs, Robbie let the boat ground gently on the shingle. Stepping knee-deep into the water, he edged the prow onto the stones. Then, moving as silently and cautiously as possible, he approached the nearest of the pups and knelt beside it. The pup's fur was thick and wet, but the wetness did not seem to bother it, for it was sound asleep, lying on its back with its flippers in the air. Robbie stared at the sleeping pup. It was the first time he had seen one at such close quarters, and he could feel the desire to touch it becoming quite overpowering. Gently, he reached out a hand and laid it on the thick white fur. The pup's great, round eyelids snapped open. Its mouth opened also, showing 2 rows of very white, very sharp teeth. Rolling quickly over onto its belly, it made an angry hissing noise at Robbie. Then, with strong, rapid movements of its flippers, it began pulling itself away from him. Robbie stared after it, swallowing his disappointment as best he could before he turned to the next pup. This one was also lying on its back, and it seemed even more sound asleep than the first pup had been, for it hardly stirred at all when Robbie ventured a gentle hand on its fur. Cautiously he knelt beside it, with his right hand supporting himself on the shingle. He let his left hand travel slowly, very slowly, across the pup's soft wet fur, and slowly, slowly, as Robbie's fingers caressed it, the pup awakened. It stretched, tail and flippers quivering. It made little, contented mewing noises, and its head rolled around to rest against Robbie's right forearm. Its eyes opened, great, dark, brown, shining eyes as round as buttons, that stared soulfully up at him. Robbie began to tremble with the effort not to laugh at this look. The pup was still leaning its head against his right arm, and when he thought he had control of himself, he slipped his left arm around the other side of its body. Carefully then, he gathered the pup clear off the shingle and rose, holding it cradled in his arms. It was astonishingly heavy, he found, for such a young creature, and even more astonishing was the heat that came from its damp little body. Holding it, thought Robbie, was like holding a little furnace against his chest. The black nails on the underside of the pup's flippers caught his attention, and he put one finger against them to see what it would do. Immediately, it bent its flippers so that it could grip the finger with these nails, and there was such strength in the grip that Robbie realized there was no way of breaking it except by laying the pup down. Unwillingly, he did so, and then saw the reason for the power in the pup's grip as it bent its flippers again and used the nails to pull itself rapidly away from the shingle. The other pups on the beach were all awake, their heads turning towards him, their bright brown button eyes staring. Robbie approached them one by one, stopping gently, going down on one knee beside them, but the pups would have none of him. They hissed, showing rows of sharp white teeth, as the first pup had done. Even the pup he had lifted was unfriendly now that it was wide awake and could sense the alarm of the others. And, resigning himself to this at last, Robbie walked back to the boat. But still, he told himself, he had done what he had set out to do. He had discovered at last what a Selkie felt like, and so he learned something that even old Da had never been able to teach him, quite apart from which it had been fun to hold the pup. Feeling greatly pleased with himself as he came to this conclusion, Robbie considered what he could do next, and wondered if he should head for one of the big yos, where he knew there was a nursery of over 50 pups. He could take the boat into the yo, he thought, and from a safe distance there, he could watch the 3 bull Selkies that roared challenges to one another as they guarded the beach, and he could count the pups to see if any more had been born since his last visit. This last thought decided him on what he wanted to do, and, bending strongly to the oars, he headed for the big yo. It was not far away. 20 minutes of rowing like this brought him to the entrance channel, and with careful strokes he backed the boat through this narrow passage. In the wider water beyond, he turned the boat. Then, gently feathering as old Da had taught him, he sat staring at every detail in the scene about him. The water lapping the boat was deep and green, the color of melted emeralds. The high cliff walls of the yo were wet black, streaked with dull green veins of serpentine. The upward slope of the shingle beach at the yo's inner end was backed by a great jumble of larger stones, and above this jumble, the empty mouth of the cave yawned, huge and black. On the beach itself, 3 bull seals reared up, bellowing at one another, and everywhere around the great grayish-black forms of the bulls, right from the mouth of the cave down to the edge of the emerald water, was a mass of cow seals and their pups. The side of the boat had already sent these cow seals heading for the water, and soon, as Robbie roared closer inshore, they were gliding all around him. He had other things on his mind at that moment, however, and paying no attention to the graceful forms of the cow seals, he prepared for his count of the pups. He would have to stand up on the boat to make this count, he decided. Otherwise, he would not get a clear view of the pups that lay among the big boulders at the back of the beach. But standing up in the boat needed not unbalance it, of course. Not if he used the trick he had learned along with the other boys of Black Ness playing around with boats in the shallows of the Foe. Carefully, slipping one of his oars into this decision, Robbie slid the other one over the stern of the boat. Then, rising to his feet and holding the second oar almost upright against the stern, he made quick, gentle little movements that sent the boat sculling steadily along the line of the shore. The 3 bull seals roared again, as if in astonishment at this sight. The pups kept up the shrill mewing for their vanished mothers, and, rearing chest high out of the water, the cow seals themselves began to make the sort of noise that cow seals do make at this particular time of the year. Robbie quite forgot to count then, so this noise from the cow seals was a high, sweet one that sounded like human voices sliding up a scale and echoing eerily between the steep walls of the yo. Also, it was something he had never heard before, in spite of all the times he had watched seals, and he was quite entranced by it. Maybe, he thought, it was this that old Da had been thinking about when he told that long-ago story about Selkie singing. Then, suddenly at the back of his mind, he found a different sort of memory stirring. He had heard this noise before, he realized. It was the singing sound he had heard from his father's fiddle On Finlearson's first night on the island. The boat began to rock under him as his mind wandered further down this track, and he sculled fast to try to bring it back to an even keel. It swung in a half circle, bringing him round to face the cliff at the inner end of the Yo, but where the line of the cliff top had been bare a moment before, there was now a man standing. With a jerk of surprise, Robbie recognized the man as Finlearson, and it was this startled moment that finally cost him his balance. The boat rocked wildly, snatching the oar from his grasp, and he pitched overboard. The emerald water closed over him. The boat was spun away by the force of his splashing plunge, and he surfaced with his mouth open on a yell, for the water was very deep, and he could not swim so much as a single stroke. A shout from the cliff top answered his yell, but Robbie was struggling too madly to hear this. Water sang in his ear. Water blurred his vision, so that black cliff and gray sky and emerald water became nothing but colors jumbling in a confused mass around him. Yet still he managed to gulp enough air to keep from choking, for the fact of the matter is that even a person in Robbie's position can stay afloat like this for a good minute before he goes right under. No one had ever told him this, however, and so the terror of drowning was like a frenzy on him. Moreover, he was too blinded by water to send Finlearson starting down towards him, and leaping swift as a cat from ledge to ledge on the cliff face. Halfway down the cliff, Finlearson paused, balanced for a blink of an eye on his perch, and then dived, and Robbie's first hint of rescue was the splash and surging backwash of this dive. A second later, he felt a hand catch hold of his hair. An arm closed around him, pinning his threshing hand to his sides. A voice breathed in his ear, "Easy now, easy." The arm holding his head clear of the water. Robbie drew a great breath of fresh air and realized that Finlearson was swimming strongly with him to the boat still drifting a few yards away. A hand came out over his head, reaching the grasp of the boat's gunwale, and Finlearson prepared to swing him inboard. The arm holding him shifted position, and he realized something else. There was warmth like a furnace heat in the body pressed against his own, and the hand gripping him had fingertips that probed like steel into his flesh. A quick heave sent him tumbling over the gunwale, and he landed in the bottom of the boat with a clear, sharp memory of the only other time he had ever been held in such a grip or felt a body so warm. It was the same afternoon when he had picked up the young Selkie. Yet how could that be? How could there be Selkie warmth in a man's body and Selkie strength in a man's hands? Robbie's mind began to race suddenly, remembering his old-ass tale about the Selkies that took human shape and the great Selkie that tempted golden-haired girls into his kingdom under the sea. In a flash, then, he had the answer to both his questions and the reason for everything that had ever puzzled him about Finlearson. The dream of the Selkie music that had proved to be something he really had heard, the stare that had Tam captive, the gold, the dancing, the magic escape from the press gang, the vision of Elspeth dead in bridal white, and above all, the smile, the secret little smile. He understood now the meaning of all these things. He knew now why old Da had warned him it was Elspeth who was in danger. Finlearson's hand appeared over the gunwale of the boat. The fingers that looked human and felt as hard as a Selkie's nails tightened their grip, and a terror sharp as the terror of drowning shot through Robbie, for there was one more thing he could guess at, now that the meaning of all these other things had become clear. Finlearson had not rescued him out of kindness, any more than the saving of the Sixering crew had sprung from the same reason. It was only a cunning desire to stand well in his parents' eyes that had prompted both actions, which meant he had only to give the slightest hint of his own thoughts now to find that his life would be worth less than an instant's purchase. Finlayson heaved himself inboard. Then, with all the friendliness of recent weeks gone from his voice, he asked, "What are you doing in the yo, anyway?" "Counting Selkie pups," Robbie'd answer shakingly. "The same as I used to do with every year with old Da." Finlayson gave him a long, suspicious look. "You're sure that was all you were doing?" he demanded. And for a moment, Robbie found himself feeling more puzzled than afraid. "Of course, I'm sure," said he. "What other reason could I have for being here?" Finlayson did not answer this. He took up the single oar left in the boat and began paddling with it to reach the other oar adrift in the yo. And as he reached out for it, Robbie decided on the sort of remark he knew would be expected from him in that moment. "I would have drowned if you had not been there," he said awkwardly, "and I owe you thanks for that." "You were lucky," Finlayson told him. "I had just happened to notice you heading for this yo, and kept you in sight from the cliff top. I had the feeling you might get in trouble here, and that was why I was ready for it when you did." The drifting oar came within his grasp, and drawing it inboard, he asked it harshly, "And so keep out of this yo in future, do you hear? It's high time you learn to leave deep waters to those who can swim in them." That could have been meant as advice, thought Robbie, but said in that harsh voice, it sounded more like a warning, or even a threat. Moreover, why had Finlayson sounded so suspicious of his presence in the yo in the first place? Crouched in the bottom of the boat, Robbie watched Finlayson beginning to row, and the nearer the boat drew towards home, the more clearly he saw that he would have to tell someone the truth about him. Yet, who was there to tell? Certainly not his ma and Da, for they would never believe it was the truth. Not now that Finlayson had put them even deeper in his debt with this latest rescue. Which meant it would have to be Nickel Anderson, Robbie decided eventually. Nickel had everything to gain by believing the truth after all, and nothing whatever to lose. It would be worthwhile at least trying to make Nickel believe him.